Further ado, Bill Whittle.
Hi, everybody. Yes, that's exactly what I want to do. I don't get to do too many colleges, so first of all, it's nice being at a college. It's nice seeing younger people. Mostly I do Tea Party groups and Republican groups, and I look out and the average age is, deceased. So this is a nice change. And I found, having done a couple of places like Oberlin, which is an extremely progressive college, that if I just do my normal dog and pony show and stand here and talk for 45 minutes, the people that don't agree with me will just roll their eyes and snort a little bit, and it puts them on the defensive. And I don't want anybody on the defensive. I want to be on the defensive, because I'm good on defense. So what I thought I would do is just give you a couple bullet points about the kind of things I believe in, and then you can ask the stump the conservative. I'd just like to get some idea of the lay of the land. No one's going to get picked on here, but just roughly, how many of you out there would call yourself conservatives or libertarians? Raise your hand. Well, it's a Republican group. Okay, anybody out there consider themselves liberal, progressives? It's okay. All right. And some middle of the roaders. My gosh. Well, I thought we were going to be playing to a hostile crowd. We'll just get out a deck of cards and we'll play some poker. All right, well then we'll do this a little differently, because when I did an event a couple weeks ago at a school in, it was an all-Jewish school in Altadena, right? No, not Altadena, Palo Alto, sorry, thank you. That's Carla, who runs the business and keeps me from bumping into furniture. We found that they had a lot of questions to ask, and then I learned a lot about what they thought I was by the kind of questions that they asked. So if we have mostly conservatives in here, we might just do this a little differently with the same basic idea. So why don't you ask me the kind of questions that you get asked? Why don't you tell me the kind of things that you find hard to reply to, or the kind of things that you get all the time? You want to talk about gay marriage, you want to talk about gun control, you want to talk about defense, any of it. Because really what I'd like to do with my time here is arm you guys up with some hand grenades to throw back when people start coming in your face about socialism and all the rest of it. So let me just tell you a couple things that I believe in. I'll get to questions in a second. Just in a nutshell, here's my basic belief system. No conservative that I know believes in no government. No conservative that I know believes that the government needs to go away. There's some radical anarchists who believe that, but I'm certainly not one of them. I just want a government that fits in the box it came in, honestly. I want a government that's small enough to fit in the box it came in. That government was designed to be small, and it was designed to be out of people's hair as much as possible, and every year it gets more and more involved with things, and I think that's just terrible. I don't like how politicized everything is. I think politics is kind of nasty, and I'm kind of shocked at myself to be in this business, to be honest with you. I never thought I'd be doing this, but somebody has to. So I believe that government has a place, and the place is pretty clearly defined in the Constitution, what the federal government should be doing, and if it's not there, it probably doesn't belong there. Doesn't mean it doesn't need to get done, but it doesn't belong in the federal government. So I believe in small government. I believe that in virtually every case where government and private business are trying to do the same thing, and I mean, I can't think of an exception, private business is far better. And not just better in terms of quality, it's better in terms of cost, it's better morally, it's just better. So I'm a big believer in private property, free enterprise, and private businesses. I think that American military has been the best force for good in the history of the world. I can say that without any question whatsoever, that of all the great powers that have filled the world stage, the United States is by far the most morally decent, the most restrained, the most generous, great power in the history of the world. And I am a big believer in the military, and I believe that we should have a good one, a really top one. I'm a big believer in law and order. I believe that laws are laws and that everybody follows the rules. As a matter of fact, I can sum up pretty much everything I believe in this way. I believe in basically two laws. I think two laws, if you had two laws, that's all you need. And here are the two laws. The first law is, don't hurt anybody and don't take their stuff. And the second law is, do what you say you're going to do. If you just have those two laws, everything's fine. Because if you think about it, every single violation, every single crime, every single piece of lawsuits are a violation of one of those two laws. Do what you say you're going to do, and don't hurt anybody or take their stuff. And when you think about it, that's all you need. And the reason I'm in favor of a small government is because if people are virtuous, let me rephrase that. Because I say the word virtuous to some people, they think virtue means, not having sex to your 70 or something. But that's not what it means. Virtue just means don't be a dick, okay? It just means don't be a jerk. Don't be a jerk. And if you have a population that's made up of people who most of the time are not jerks, they're not hitting people, they're not taking their stuff, and they're doing what they say they're going to do, you can leave those people more or less alone. But if they are going to be jerks, now all of a sudden you need surveillance systems, and you need police forces, and you need prisons, and you need wardens, and you need bailiffs, and you need juries and trials and lawyers and all the rest of it. But if people basically had this fundamental idea of virtue, don't take anybody's stuff, do what you say you're going to do, and don't hurt anybody, that's all you need. And frankly, pretty much everything I believe comes from that pretty simple law. So on the occasions where I get a question that I hadn't really thought about the answer before, I just go back there. I just go right back there. I believe in individual freedom, and that individual freedom is the same coin, and on the other side it says individual responsibility. And that's why I think that this attack on free speech in college campuses is not just morally wrong. I think everybody would understand why I would think that this safe space, triggered warnings, you shut up, get off campus, you're not welcome here with your hate speech. I find that morally wrong, but I also find it economically stupid. I mean, this college doesn't seem to be too bad at it, but certainly at the University of Missouri, that's going to be the first college generation that ever got out of college stupider than they went in. And there's no excuse for that. These are ideas. If you don't like the ideas, make me a better idea. Because here's why, I may not always be right, but I'm never wrong. Here's why. Because when somebody shows me where I'm wrong, I will move. I will change my mind. If somebody convinces me that they've got a better argument than I've got, and that they can provide some evidence and some logic, I will move from where I was over here, because I think the truth exists out in the world, and I don't think you can bring the truth to you. I think you have to stand on top of it. And if you feel like you're standing on top of the truth, you can say anything you want to without fear, because if it's true, no matter how hurtful it might be, no matter how negative it might be, no matter how destructive it might seem, if it's true, it needs to be said, because problems cannot be solved until we know what the problem actually is. And by pretending to not speak the truth, we're not only not doing ourselves a service, we're also not doing the people who need the help the most a service. That's pretty much what I believe in, so let's wind up the peanut gallery, and seriously, if there's a mostly conservative crowd here, give me the ones that you hear all the time, and give me the ones that you just maybe have a hard time answering, or gee, they've got a good point. That's what I really like to do with the rest of the time today, and I'm just going to go till you stop me. I'll be here till the cows come home. There are cows around here? Okay, I'll be here till they come home. Yes, ma'am?
I often get asked, because I'm pro-development, I often get asked that I'm an anti-environmentalist. If I'm supporting oil or other things, I often get asked, well, that's just because you hate the environment. And so what's a couple of sound bites that I could counter? Because I also find that when I try to counter, I get what I call, yeah, but remember what happened in 7th grade? Like there's some off topic.
Yeah,
they will
move the goalposts.
They'll move the goalposts, start a whole other conversation, and I just kind of want to just be able to just say it's this because it's this.
Okay, got it. All right, well, let's start talking about this then. This idea of development, the idea of commerce, the idea of business, and especially the idea of energy, because that's what we're really talking about. Energy versus the environment. First of all, if we're having this conversation in a room that's constructed out of concrete with electric lights on overhead, then somebody's paying for this energy, and energy's coming from somewhere. We're not sitting in the dark here. We're not sitting around a campfire. We may be criticizing energy, but we've been using energy our entire lives. And some of the people who criticize oil and gas and fracking the most go home and turn on their Xboxes, which are powered by oil and natural gas. So let's just start there. Okay, there are people who can make the argument that this whole thing is evil, but those people live in a hut in the dark. Those people are able to speak without being hypocrites. It's just like watching people sit in a Starbucks on their Apple computers using Wi-Fi provided by AT&T to bitch about how bad corporations are. It's this kind of invisible thing that nobody realizes, but the power is on here. Somebody's providing the power, and if the power were off forever, we change our minds on this whole thing real quick. So we have to look at the unseen side of it first. But let's talk about the pollution issue. Most of you don't remember this, but I do, and some of us do. In the 1970s, I was talking to this gentleman earlier. I not only grew up in the previous century, I grew up in the previous millennium. That's just an awesome thing to say. But I grew up in the previous millennium. And when I was a kid, you would see smokestacks belching black smoke into the air all the time. The side of the road was littered with rubbish, and at any given time you might be following a car and somebody would take an entire McDonald's bag and just chuck it out the window. All the jets taking off from LAX used to leave these brown and black smudges in the air from where their jet exhaust used to be, and sitting in traffic you could look at every single car around you and see little puffs of blue smoke coming out of the tailpipe. In the 1970s, the river in Cleveland, Ohio, I think it's the Cayuga River, caught fire. The river caught fire, and the river burned for 3 days. It was on fire. And the reason the water was on fire was because there was so much oil and junk in the water that the river caught fire. And the Great Lakes were just these gigantic, enormous pools of water where nothing lived and everything was dead. Now, when you have a world like that, I am a big supporter of the Environmental Protection Agency. I don't think it should be a federal program, but we'll just put that aside for a second. So many of our issues today are these asymptotic issues. And the EPA is a perfect example of this. So what do I mean by asymptotic? Well, if we were to draw, hello? Wide, okay. If we were to draw an exponential curve, right? Here's the y-axis, here's the x-axis. We know that an exponential curve is something that as time goes on, the event gets faster and higher, right? The inverse of that is an asymptotic curve, and what that means is, as time goes on, the amount of increase slows and slows and slows and slows and slows until it reaches almost nothing. Now, why am I bringing that up? When they're dumping mercury into the river, then the Environmental Protection Agency is doing some good for the country. When there's nothing but clouds of black smoke and people in Los Angeles can't go outside because their eyes are burning, then I'm completely in favor of the Environmental Protection Agency. But when those problems have been solved, and they have been solved because I've lived in LA since '88, and when I got there, I was working in Beverly Hills as a driver for Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and I was there for 3 weeks before it cleared up enough for me to, my God, I live in a valley, there's mountains out there. Those days are gone. Those days are gone. There's 4 or 5 times more cars now than when I got there, and the air is far, far cleaner. So when there's a problem like that, I'm in favor of the EPA. But the EPA, like all other federal agencies, doesn't go away when it does its job, and it certainly doesn't scale back when it does its job. Every federal agency, you have to understand this, every single one of them is predicated on raising their budgets by a set amount every year. And it will happen automatically. It's a 2 or 3% increase every year. 5, thank you. To give you an example of this, a particularly close example, because I didn't mention this, but I saw the Thunderbirds when I was 5 and I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I wanted to go supersonic, shoot down communists, and then I wanted to command a Mars mission, because that's what kids did when I was that age. But I had so much love for NASA. I saw the moon landing when I was 10. And you could have almost seen the NASA Vector logo on the inside of my skin. I mean, it was tattooed on my heart. I had such respect and regard for that organization. But it's a federal agency. And in 2006, the budget for NASA was about $14 billion. And in 2015, the budget was about $14.5 billion. And the only difference between those 2 years was in 2006, we were actually putting people into space aboard 4 space shuttles. Now we don't fly into space at all. And they're spending more money. The space program, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, is spending more money now that they're not flying space shuttles than they did back when they were flying space shuttles. Anybody besides me find that a little odd? I mean, if you're going to eliminate the space access system and we're not going to fly in space anymore, you'd think that would save us some money, right? You'd think that NASA's budget would go from 14 to 2, so we can talk about green buildings or something. So, Environmental Protection Agency gets more and more and more amped about smaller and smaller things. That's a particular problem. So what I'm really trying to say to you is this. The environment today in this country is imaginably cleaner than it was in the 1970s. There's more prime forest in America today than there was when Columbus got here. My dad was a hunter his entire life, and he died in 2002. He said he'd never seen so many deer in his life. Things like the bald eagle, which are nearly extinct, are coming back. Things like the bison, which were nearly extinct, are coming back. There's these gigantic herds. This idea that the planet is dying is precisely inversely correct. It's exactly the opposite. Now, there are still some environmental problems that have to be dealt with, and I'm in favor of dealing with those in a reasonable way. But this idea that us having energy by pulling oil or natural gas out of the ground is killing the planet is a lie, and it's designed to destroy capitalism. It's designed to destroy the free market. It's designed to destroy business. It's designed to destroy wealth creation and all the rest of it. Because this country is much cleaner than it used to be. By the way, for those of you who have friends who are Bernie supporters, the dirtiest places in the world are the socialist places. If you looked at the difference between West Germany and East Germany, East Germany was a toxic dump, because in socialist countries, there are no individuals. They're just cogs that work for the big state. And if the state wants to burn energy, well, that's what the state's going to do. And if we have to put mercury in your bathtub, then that's what we're going to do. And you don't get to complain about it because you're a prole, you're a worker, you're a cog. All of the capitalist countries are cleaner economically than the socialist ones. And the richer the country is, the cleaner it is. So let's generate some more wealth, why don't we? And clean things up even more. Natural gas, by the way, which we have more of now, there's more natural gas and petroleum available to Americans under our feet. Forget Alaska. In terms of the Bakken oil reserves and all this other stuff, we can now get more energy than there is in all of Saudi Arabia and Russia combined. And natural gas is the most clean burning of fossil fuels, and we have a lot of natural gas now because of fracking. We have a lot of oil that we didn't have because of horizontal drilling. They told us that we would run out. Your progressive friends have been talking about peak oil since you were in diapers. But peak oil hasn't happened yet, and it's probably never going to happen, because you know why? We get smarter. And this is an engineering school. And the reason we get smarter is because of people like you, who go and figure out a way to do something that hadn't been done before, better, faster, and less expensively. And all of a sudden, all of these shortages have disappeared. Next question. Yes, sir.
I consider myself a staunch libertarian, but one area I've had problems reconciling my beliefs is, as much as I'm not in favor of the government forcing a person to do something, I can't help but feel that a parent not allowing their child to get a vaccination or a blood transfusion is child abuse. I wonder what your thoughts on that are.
That's a really great question. The question is, does the government or anybody else have the power, should have the power, to coerce somebody into inoculating their kids? And my answer is no. If the federal government or any government, if any force outside uses the power of the gun, when I say held a gun to your head from now on, when I talk about the government holding a gun to your head, what I'm really saying is this. If I were to say that you pay your taxes because the government's holding a gun to your head, what I mean is, over time, if you don't pay your taxes, over time, somebody's going to start giving you phone calls. Then they're going to start giving you letters. Then they're going to start sequestering your bank accounts. Don't ask how I know all of this stuff. I just do. And then, sooner or later, when you don't pay any attention to this, men with guns are going to show up very politely, and they're going to ask you to go downtown with them. And if you decide you don't want to go downtown with them, then they're going to use force to take you. So I don't think that the government should have the right to put the gun to the head of anybody on an issue like that. That issue, what happens to your children is your decision. And the idea that any force, forget the government, any force, any church, any group, anybody, has the right to come into your home and make your kids do something, especially biologically, put something in them that you didn't approve of, that's horrific to me. However, with that said, I don't think it's inappropriate for school boards and probably not the federal government, but local level governments to make the case for inoculation. Because nobody's making the case. I talk about this all the time. I talk about the unseen things. We don't realize that the power's on until the power's off, right? It's invisible. Inoculation is one of those things. We're not dying of scurvy, and we're not dying of rickets, and we're not dying of measles, and we're not dying of polio, because we were all inoculated. And since we're all inoculated, and since there's none of these diseases here, we start thinking, do we really need these inoculations? Everybody's healthy. It's like everybody's healthy because of the inoculations. And so somebody needs to make the case for this. And if it turns out, I don't think the evidence is there, but if it turns out that combining these inoculations and immunizations into one super shot is causing damage to children, then that needs to be dealt with. But I don't think that evidence is there, but if it is there, then let's just fix that aspect of it, because inoculations is why we're all not dropping dead, all of us. And inoculations only work if everybody's inoculated, right? If half of the population is inoculated and the other half is not, then that half is going to be infecting each other, and they're going to be dropping dead, and we're going to have to take care of them, and so on and so forth. So, no, I don't believe in coercive power, but I do believe inoculations are really important. Yes, sir?
Okay, you covered inoculations pretty well, but what about situations in which a child is likely to die if they don't get some kind of organ or blood transplant, and then it just comes down to that?
So, Christian Scientist, let's say, has a child, and the child is sick, and a blood transfusion or something simple would save them, and the parents decide it's against their religion, they're not going to do it. Man, that's a tough one. That's a really, 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 really tough one. I think in that case you have the right to intervene. I think you probably do. Because you said it's a child.
Yeah.
The child is not old enough to make its own decisions about whether or not it wants to go along with this idea of religion. The child is not old enough to make that decision. It's a child. And so you have to assume that this child should live long enough to be old enough to make a decision as to whether or not they want to accept this for their own body. If I have a medical procedure, what I just basically did with the inoculation was, I don't think the government has a right to come in and harm your child. But I don't know if you really have a right to harm your child either. I'm not exactly sure that there's much difference between a person who leaves a kid without food and a person who leaves a kid without a transfusion if it's what he needs. And we would call that neglect. Now, that's a very tough one, but it's a very tough one in a very, very, very small slice of America, which is Christian Science, basically. I think that a Christian Scientist certainly has the right, and again, I've never had that question before ever in my life. I'm just going back to my core beliefs, right? If it turns out that a person is 18 years old, is legally considered an adult, love the Christian Science idea, want to take on the faith of their parents, and then they need a transfusion, and then they decide not to get it, that's an adult who made a decision on their own for their own body, which should be allowed. Obviously, that's my whole belief system. But if you're not old enough to make the decision, I don't think that kid should have to pay with his life for their parents' decision. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So yesterday we had a discussion with a lot of people from a certain political view, and so they're shouting, the wage gap, the 79 cents to $1, and they're shouting that at me. And how should we counter the feminist argument that equal pay for equal work should be through legislation through the government?
If you don't believe that women should get paid the same as men for the same job, then you're a barbarian and there's something wrong with you. You have a moral defect and you've got a genetic defect and you need to go to a doctor. Women doing the same work for the same job should get the same pay, obviously. But the 72 cents on the dollar is not about that. And if they don't know it, they should know it. The reason, and that number is not quite correct, but let's just assume that it is. Let's just assume that they're right when they say if you take all of the male salaries in the country and all of the female salaries in the country, the male salaries are higher per capita and the ratio is 100 to 72, right? Let's say that's true. Why is it true? When you break out why it's true, you find the reason that men make more than women is not because they make more than women in the same job. It's because men generally do more dangerous jobs than women do, they take less time off than women do, they take less maternity leave, less gaps, they're being higher paid for more dangerous work, and that reflects itself in a higher salary for men because they're doing either more dangerous work or perhaps more like engineering work, high-level work. You're going to see that gap close as more and more women become engineers, but it's still primarily a male attraction. You know, everybody's talking about getting women into STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering, and math. And instead of young women getting into STEM, they take women's studies and they hold up a sign saying, we need more women in STEM. Well, the reason there's not more people in STEM is because STEM is hard. And I was a theater major and I've taken engineering classes and I can tell you which one is easier, and it's not the theater, okay? So, the response to this is this. The difference between these two average incomes is because they're not doing the same job, because males have done and continue to do longer hours, more overtime, and more dangerous jobs that pay higher. That doesn't mean that they're getting paid more than the women are for the same job. It just means they're doing jobs that pay more. And think about it. I mean, really, when you think about how ridiculous their position is, it's just so absurd that they would even hurl that at you. So next time you hear that, just say this. So you're telling me that if I'm a manager at Walmart and I'm looking to hire an assistant manager, and somebody comes in, a woman comes in and applies for the job, and I look at her resume and say, you know, you're really suited for this. How much does it pay? Well, it pays $40,000 for men, but it's going to pay $27,000 for you, sugar love. Who thinks that happens? Who thinks that happens? It could never happen, because if it did happen, that woman would own Walmart in this legal environment. If you're really telling me, do you actually tell me you believe that a woman can walk into a job and get 72 cents on the dollar for the exact same job? No, it doesn't happen. It's against the law already. So it's just plain lie. Some of them know it's a lie, some of them don't, but it's a lie because men do different work, not the same work, and it's also a lie because, needless to say, any woman got paid less for the same exact job would have a lawsuit the size of Idaho on their hands. And they'd win, too. Yes, sir?
You know, I have a question. I'm in the healthcare industry, and it seems like the media is not paying attention to the folks who actually have to pay for their healthcare premiums, and how they're avoiding the physicians because they have a high deductible, high out-of-pocket. So this whole idea of Affordable Care Act is less affordable for many. And my question to you is, it seems like there's been lots of battles to trying to repeal Obamacare through the Supreme Court. Is there any hope that that we can stop this trend, or is it pretty much here to stay?
So for those of you who didn't hear, it's a question about Obamacare and spiraling health costs and how it's actually getting more expensive for less coverage. And he asked it whether there's any chance of repealing it. We've tried to repeal it. Republicans have tried to repeal it 2 or 3 times or 50 times or something. They haven't succeeded. It's going to repeal itself. And the reason it's going to repeal itself is because the math doesn't work. You cannot violate the laws of economics in the same way that you cannot violate the laws of gravity. You can change laws, but you can't change the law of gravity. It's 32 feet per second anywhere on the earth, no matter where you go. That's how fast things fall. And these things do not make economic sense, and they never have. And all of the Obamacare exchanges are they're literally going out of business because young people aren't signing up the way that older people did. Imagine my surprise. When I was 23, I was immortal. I'm still immortal. I'm going to outlive all of you. But I thought I was immortal. Nothing can happen to me. I'm 23. What could possibly happen to me? I didn't have health insurance until I was probably 45. And that may sound terribly dangerous to you and terribly wrong, but I could certainly afford a doctor's visit. My reasoning was, I did have at least the common sense to reason it. My reasoning was, look, if I walk out and get hit by a bus, they are going to take me to the hospital. They are going to treat me the same way as they treat anybody with insurance. And they are going to save my life. Now, I may be in debt for $200,000, then I have to declare bankruptcy, and that's what I get for not having health insurance. But it's not like I don't get the treatment. You can talk to Europeans about the American healthcare system, and they say people aren't insured. They think people are dying in the streets outside of hospitals. And we don't treat cancer patients unless you've got a platinum healthcare. No. If I get hit by a car, and President Obama gets hit by the car, and somebody, that's just an analogy, it's not a wishful thinking or anything, and a homeless person gets hit by a car, the ambulances are going to come at the same time, they're going to take them to the same place and treat them the same. So I just want to get that out of the way. Now with that out of the way, the reason that this thing is not working is because it's never going to work. And I'm not going to give you too much of this, but since you work in the industry, right now, there's a couple of these kind of iron triangles out there. I'll talk about the other one in a minute. But one of them is this triangular web of the healthcare system we have now. And that system consists of the patient, the federal government, it consists of the federal government, the insurance company, and the healthcare provider like the hospital or the doctor, right? And these things go round and round and round. There's very reliable evidence that says for every dollar that is taken out of your taxes for healthcare, 33 cents goes to the actual physician. 33 cents of every dollar spent on healthcare actually goes to the physician. So what does that mean? That means doctors have to have 2 or 3 times more patients than they used to in order to make the same living, and it means that everybody going in has a third of the time that they used to have, and a third of the attention, and all the rest of it. Because what people like Bernie Sanders want you to believe is this. Bernie Sanders wants you to believe it's better for him to reach into my wallet, take $1, send the dollar to Washington, have them peel off 33 cents of that dollar for their bureaucracies and for the graft and all the rest of the stuff that happens in Washington, and save that 66 cents over to the insurance company, who's going to peel off another 33 cents of that to make up for the premiums and their standing army of 1 million people, and then they're going to send 33 cents to the doctor, right? And they think this is better, smarter, and more moral. My feeling is, why don't I just give the doctor $1 instead of 33 cents? Why don't I just give him the $1? Why don't I give him the $1? Hello? It seems to make sense to me. And what you find is that if you look in the actual world, there are large numbers. Virtually every medical office in the country now has cash discounts, and it's not like a 10% cash discount, it's a 90% cash discount. Surgeries that might cost $25,000, like a carpal tunnel thing, if you build it through insurance, they'll do it out of pocket for $2,800. A tenth. Why? Because they get the whole $2,800, and not only do they not get a third of it, but they don't have to do all of the paperwork and all of this nonsense that has to happen with Medicare and all of this other. It's just insane. I went to a doctor once, and I was sitting in the waiting room, and the head nurse who was running the place just threw down the phone, and she said, "Is it possible that we could just do some medicine in this office? Do you think maybe we could just do some medicine instead of having to comply with all of these rules?" I was talking about coming in here and giving you hand grenades, so here's a great hand grenade for your progressive friends. I want to know why the Democratic Party likes cars better than people. I think people are more important than cars, but they think cars are much more important than people. And the reason they think that is because my car has all kinds of decisions it can make when it comes time for its insurance. My car gets to decide whether or not I want a high deductible or a low deductible. My car gets to decide how much coverage the car wants. My car decides how much they want to pay a month. My car has hundreds of people competing for the insurance for my car, but I don't. I have to go to this government-run thing that has 3 options because they hate people, these progressives and these Democrats. They can't stand them, they hate them. So my car is far better off, has thousands more options, and why is car insurance so much cheaper than health insurance? Well, obviously health insurance can be a higher price, but there's competition. There's competition. Why does the iPhone cost $200-300 if you've got a plan, or $500 without it? Why doesn't this miracle cost $60,000? Well, because Samsung and LG are making phones too. And if we keep it at $60,000, we're not going to sell any of them. Competition drives the price down. And in the healthcare situation right now, if you bill, you can see this on an actual bill. You can go to a hospital now, and you can be on an itemized bill for the hospital. If you pay it through your insurance, the itemized bill will show one aspirin tablet, $20. $20. If you buy them in a big bulk of 100 at Walmart, they're 2 cents. So 10 times would be 20 cents. 100 times would be $2. 1,000 times would be $20. It's 1,000 times more expensive. And they bill it because they can. They bill it because they can, because nobody owns the money. Because the insurance companies get the subsidies from the government gets their taxes from you, and it's nobody's money, and that's how it works. But if you had a plan to get the cost of that aspirin tablet from $20 back down to $20 back down to 2 cents, you can assume that most of the other costs would go away as well. That this could then, in fact, be a reasonable thing to pay for. And let me just say one thing here about this healthcare thing, because I know this is one of the things that they attack conservatives with the most. Look, they'll say, why do you have a problem with free healthcare? I don't have a problem with free healthcare. If healthcare were free, I'd be a progressive. What kind of a jerk would I have to be to say, no healthcare for you, it's free, but no, you can't have any, I don't like the way you look. If healthcare were free, I'd be a progressive about healthcare, and I would give all the free healthcare I could to everybody I would find, but it's not free. It costs money. And if it costs money, we have to decide how we're going to pay for it. And if we start talking about how we're going to pay for it, all of a sudden we're conservatives again. You can say that walking on the beach might be free, but 5 cardiosurgeons and anesthetists and nurses in an operating theater in an expensive hospital, all this machinery, that costs money. So how are we going to pay for it? They want to take more money from your pocket by force, send it to Washington, they take their share, send it to the insurance companies, they take their share, and send it to the doctor, he gets 33 cents. It sucks. It's terrible. It's got to go. Yes, sir.
It seems clear that Obamacare is imploding. It's in its death spiral already.
Yep.
My fear is, as it collapses, the same people who gave us Obamacare will be there to say, you see, what we really needed all along is single payer.
Yep. Well, let's take it out of healthcare and into a related field. Let's talk about the cost of education. Okay. A lot of your socialist friends, a lot of your Bernie friends are saying you should vote for Bernie because you get free college, right? You make college free, right? That's what they say. Bernie wants free college, right? Can we just think this through for a minute, please? Let's say that Bernie Sanders is elected, and let's say that the communists take over the Congress and all the rest of it, and he gets his rate, and he gets free college. What does that mean? Well, it means 2 things. If the government is paying for the college, which is what's happening now with student loans, then the college will continue to raise its tuition because it knows that there is no price that the federal government cannot pay. If you look at the cost of tuition over the last 15 or 20 years versus the regular cost of living adjustments, it's skyrocketing. And the reason it's skyrocketing is because we subsidize it. Anything we subsidize, we get more of. Okay, and if we're subsidizing student loans, then we find people who've got $250,000 out and they've got a degree in medieval Renaissance poetry and they wonder how they're going to make this money back, and they're not. They're never going to make it back. But let's just say that Bernie comes along and he offers all of you free health care. What does that, free college. What does that mean? Does that mean that the professors and this fine gentleman over here are going to come to work and not charge anybody? Is that what that means? Does it mean that we don't have to pay for the electricity? Is that what free college means? Does it mean that when the air conditioning goes on, they're not going to bill us for that because it's a college? Is that what free college means? Because if it doesn't mean that, then free college is a non sequitur. It's paid for by somebody, it's just not paid for by you. Yet. But, if you get your free college, and as a result of this free college, the national debt goes from $20 trillion, it should be nothing, it should be a $500 billion, it should be about $500 billion. But if the national debt is $20 trillion, and Bernie wants to add another $17 trillion of debt so that the government can pay for your free college, who do you think is going to be paying for that free college for the rest of your life in forms of taxes to pay off that debt? You are, you chumps. Not you guys are smart, you chumps out there. I don't like this. I don't get to make any dramatic gestures without getting cut off by God or something. But you get the idea, right? It's like, and it's the same thing for healthcare. There's nothing is free. And when people say that healthcare is a right or college education is a right, this is why they're not rights. A right is something that does not involve an obligation on anybody else. Your right to free speech doesn't put any obligation on him at all. It doesn't make him work, it doesn't make him cost anything, it doesn't cost me anything, it's yours. It's a right. Same thing for your right to carry a gun, same thing for your right to not perjure yourself, Fifth Amendment, all this stuff. But if healthcare is free, somebody is a right, somebody's got to provide it. Because it's a right, they can't take away your rights. Somebody has to provide it, which means that somebody has to be a doctor. And if it turns out that all of this stuff is not market driven, then doctors are going to start working for, eventually they'll start working for $34,000 a year. So my question for you as college students is this: is that fair? They talk about income inequality all the time, these progressives. They talk about income inequality till they're blue in the face, and the one thing they never talk about is output inequality. Because if you look at output and income, you're going to find that they're very, very, very closely correlated. So they're going to say it's not fair that this guy's got $600,000. My response would be, he's got $600,000 because he's a brain surgeon. Okay? He's a brain surgeon. If your kid gets hit by a car, there's 5 people in the world that can save this kid, and he's one of them. He can charge whatever he wants to. Now, if it turns out that we're going to take that guy $600,000 and pay him $40,000 like Michael Moore wants to do, what do you think is going to happen to the number of people who spend 20 years to become brain surgeons? What do you think will happen? If it turns out that a guy who's working the desk at a 7-Eleven gets paid the same amount as a brain surgeon, to be fair, because we don't want any income inequality, if the guy at the 7-Eleven is making the same amount of money as the brain surgeon who studied for 20 years while this guy was out partying, this guy was passed out in back of the dumpster smoking doobies, this guy is studying so he can be that good to save a life, and you're trying to tell me that it's fair for that guy to get paid the same as this guy who did nothing but just, goof off for his entire life? That's not fair. That's robbery. That's insane. And if you force people to do it, you're not going to have any more brain surgeons. Why would you? Why would you be a brain surgeon and give up your entire party years in college? Why would you give up all the fun? Why would you give up going out with your friends? Why would you give up going to movies if you're going to get paid the same as if you did absolutely nothing? They can't get this through their heads. They just can't get it through their heads. So nothing is free. Nothing that's a commodity is free. Somebody has to pay for it. And when these guys come up to you and say, you're voting against your own interest, Bernie wants to give you free health care. No, Bernie wants to put your health care on a credit card that you're going to have to pay off for the rest of your life. Because this debt doesn't go away. The only way it goes away is if we have a complete economic collapse. And then we're not talking about this anymore. Then we're talking about eating rats on spits over burning tires in the middle of the street. That's what we're talking about. Okay? So this has not got anything to do with free stuff. It's got to do with control. He wants to control your education the way they want to control your healthcare. Next, yes, sir.
I got 2 questions.
Sure.
One, going back to your income inequality statement.
Mhm.
I feel like most of my friends that are Bernie supporters that are kind of agreeing with the income inequality statement, but not so much in the private market sense, but in like the public government sense. Do you think it's a fair criticism to say a president of a CSU making $450,000 versus a professor making $50,000? Do you think that's a fair criticism at all?
It's a wonderful, wonderful question. I'm so glad I got that question. So the question is, let's take it out of CSU. Just to make the difference bigger, okay? The question that these progressives say is it's morally wrong for a CEO of a company to make $5 million a year while his employees might be making $25,000 or $30,000 a year. And they'll point out he's making 700 or 800 times more than they are. That's wrong and evil. But the problem with that is this. Is this guy worth the $5 million? Yes or no? How much money did Beyonce make last year? It's about 20 million, maybe more. LeBron James, he's worth $30 million. Why is LeBron James worth $30 million and all the rest of the guys who were on the Heat and now on the Cavs, why aren't they worth $30 million? Because of the money he brings in, correct. Because paying LeBron James $30 million is actually a smart move for the company because they're going to bring in more than $30 million for people to see LeBron James. Why do people come to see LeBron James? Because this is the heart of your answer. Why do people come to watch LeBron James? Because he's the best in the world, right? He's the best in the world. And when he's on your team, you see things that you've never seen before. LeBron James gets to be as excellent as he can be, And he's rewarded for it in a precisely determined manner, which is determined by the market. And the market in this case is the NBA. They're going to pay whatever they can afford. And if you're telling me that LeBron James is worth the exact same as the worst player in the NBA, there's something wrong with you. So, if LeBron James is worth $30 million, and he's worth $30 million because we can all understand that he's exceptional, extraordinary, right? Then how is a guy who's running a company that may employ 100,000 people, and he's making $5 million and that's wrong? Beyonce makes $20 million. It doesn't go to anybody but herself, and that's awesome. A guy who runs a company makes $5 million. He's paying the paychecks for 60, 70,000 people. They're all getting their mortgages paid and their students paid, their loans paid, and they're getting all this clothing and food, and this is evil somehow? The guy is worth what he's worth. And it's worth what he's worth because he's worth what he's worth. And I know it sounds very simple, but it's true. You're worth what you're worth. There's an old line. I've never used this before because I just remembered it. There's an old movie and a play called A Life in the Theater. And it's about an old actor and a young actor at the makeup table talking about their years as actors. And the old guy says, I'm a better actor than you are. And the young guy says, you are not. The old guy says, yes, I am. He says, how do you know? He says, because people have paid $25 to see me, and then we pay $7 to see you. That's why I'm a better actor than you are. It doesn't mean you're a better person morally, and it doesn't necessarily mean that he's a better actor, but generally, that's how these things work out. So people decide what something is worth, and that's what they're worth. And by the way, what you're really paying for is scarcity. You're paying for scarcity. You're paying for rareness. Okay? The reason that guy's worth $5 million is because that guy can do the job of the person that's doing $30,000, but the person doing $30,000 can't do the job of the guy that's doing $5 million. Right? Presumably. So, if you want to be higher paid, find a way to make yourself more scarce. What does that mean? Let's say you're a janitor in Los Angeles. If you're a janitor in Los Angeles, you pretty much have to speak English, and you pretty much have to speak Spanish. But if you speak English and Spanish and Chinese, now there are people who will hire you because there's very few Chinese-speaking janitors in Los Angeles, and that guy will get more money for doing the same job because he's more specialized, he's scarcer, he's rarer. Find a way to make yourself rarer and scarcer, and you get paid more money because you have skills that other people don't have. And it's simple, and it doesn't have to be directly related. You know, if you're a person who's got a great economic background, you go to work in an insurance company or something, and it turns out you're a terrific cook, and you bring in, you know, you're going to bring in all these wonderful things. People are going to look at you and go, okay, great, pay that guy more money. Next, please. Yes, sir.
So,
Oh, I'm sorry, this gentleman, blonde gentleman right here.
So, you mentioned that the person who's making $5 million could do the job of the person who's making $30,000, but not the other way around.
Most cases.
That is indubitably not the case in education.
I didn't
Not
say
the case in
education.
You equated.
My question was about like education.
Okay, so you're telling me that there's no reason why the dean of a university should be paid more than a professor.
I wouldn't say that. My question was
But that's what you appear to be saying. Did I misunderstand you? I don't want to misrepresent you.
You are misrepresenting.
I'm sorry that I didn't understand you. Please explain it to me again.
What I'm saying is that the president of this college or the chancellor of the CSU system could not give a lecture on quantum mechanics, nor could he lecture on that medieval Renaissance poetry that you so derided. He couldn't do any of these highly specialized fields. He can work in administration and work in that bureaucracy that you also derided, but he can't do other things that are important that the professors do. And so it's not the case that the system of higher education is directly mappable to a corporation.
I beg to disagree with you, and the reason I disagree with you is because the job of the dean of a university is not to give quantum theory lectures, and it's not to give lectures on medieval Renaissance poetry, and it's not to be a member of the bureaucracy. The job of the dean of the university is to look out for the financial, the political, and the health of the people who are entrusted to his care. This requires a very wide skill set and a very wide set of personal attributes that are not required to lecture in college. So while it's true that that professor can't do every single job of the dean can't do the job of every other single professor, that's absolutely true. It's not true that he's not the best man for the job. Because the person who is doing the lectures in quantum physics, let's say, is not capable of doing what this guy does. If for the look, I know what a physics professor looks like. I was a physics major, And a physics professor is not the kind of guy that's going to go to a cocktail party and raise $5 million for the university. He's just not. We know what they look like, we know what they are. They're smart guys, they're great guys, but personality-wise, you know, what do engineering professors use for birth control, do you know? Their personalities. So what you get is, you find out that this guy is in fact the correct guy for the job. And when I say that he can do one job and the other person can't, I don't mean to say that it's directly a one-to-one correlation. Obviously, the president or the CEO cannot walk into Mary's cube and start billing invoices, right? I'm not suggesting that. But I'm saying that he has the capability to learn how to do that. It's within his possibilities. And it doesn't necessarily work the other way around. And let's just say, for example, that you're a CEO who's making $5 million, and over here sits a person who's making $25,000 in a cubicle, right? Just punching numbers into a machine. But let's just say that this person does, in fact, have the ability to run that corporation better than you do. That's not your fault. She is the one with the unused potential. She is the one who is not maximizing her ability. Maybe she doesn't want the stress. Maybe she doesn't want to spend the time. But it's to say that the job of the dean is the same as the job of a lecturer is not. I don't think that makes sense. Let him finish. I want to finish. I don't want to leave anybody angry or resentful.
Could it be the case that that person working $25,000 a year never, in fact, got the opportunities that would have led to her being in my position and making $5 million?
Now we're talking about privilege, of one form or another, right?
If we want to use a buzzword.
I'll abandon the buzzword. Access. What would you call what she doesn't have that he has? I'm not trying to make fun of you. I just trying to figure out what you're trying to say.
I'd unfortunately call it privilege. But
Okay.
it's difficult.
So you're using the same buzzwords that I just used.
Yeah, no, but
Okay.
what I'm saying is it's difficult, and I don't want that to bind us.
Fine. So we'll call it privilege. Look, there is a couple of things that are undeniably true about the world. And one of them is that we have no control over the family that we're born into. We never have and we never will. That is not anything that we control. So think of it as a deck of cards, okay? When you come into this world, you are dealt a hand, and you don't have anything to say about that hand at all. You're just stuck with it. Some people come in with 4 aces and a king. Some people come in with a pair of 2s or nothing. They come in with nothing. But life is not static, and life is not predetermined. You get to play the hand. You get to discard cards that are not helping you, and you get to pick up new cards that do help you. Anybody in this country, especially in this country, has the ability to move up or down based on their effort and based on their ability to go out and try and compete. And no one is deprived of that ability. No one is deprived of it. And especially today, when we've got these devices here, you know, we've got these mobile devices, and all we use them is for games and Facebook and porn, but anybody can get an education online for absolutely free and can do whatever they want to like this. So if you're trying to say that the person is not able to improve their lives, I just don't believe it. If you're saying that they're not able to improve their lives because they've been socialized to believe that they can't improve their lives, then that's a problem. So I'm willing to grant myself this is my privilege, okay? My privilege is that I never had anybody to blame. My privilege is that I was always told that I'm responsible for my own failures and my own successes. I've had 6 businesses that have failed. This is the 7th one. This one's doing better than the other 6. They were all flaming wreckage. But they were flaming wreckage. And I'm not laughing here. You notice this is a serious space. I have spent 20 years of my life trying to decide whether to pay the IRS or the rent or the food. I know what that's like. I know what it's like to have your power turned off every single month and have to go down and pay it in cash. And I know what it's like to decide whether to pay the electric bill or the rent. You pay the electric bill because you can't do anything without electricity. I've been there. Now, I am willing to agree with you that there are people who do not have this attitude, but this attitude is, in fact, the magic key to everything. You can play your hand. And many people start off with those 4 aces and a king, and they play themselves right into the toilet. Every time we talk about people rising up and making more money, there's people who started born with tons of money, they just piss it all away. So what you want, I think, you want a society that's as fluid as possible, that's as lubricated as possible. And the reason I say that is because you have no control of how you come into the world. But what you want is a world where people can move up or down or sideways, whatever, as easily as possible. And that's why I'm definitely opposed to things like barriers to stop people from getting into college, that kind of thing. You know, it used to be like you couldn't attend college in the South if you were black. The democratic laws that democratic governors put into place. No, you're not allowed to because you're black. That's got to go. And it has gone. Denying people access is not the same thing as somebody not living up to their potential. If anybody is denying anybody access in this country for reasons of race or skin or sex or color or whatever, then I am mortally opposed to those people. But you can't say that the ability to improve your life isn't in fact the single most thing. This is why you're here, it's why you're here, why all of you are here. You're here at a university now because you've made a decision that you're going to spend your time when you could be out riding bikes and surfing and doing all the rest of it, and you're going to spend a hell of a lot of money that's going to end up on your plate or your parents' plate. You've made a decision that this place is a place for you in the future to allow you to be better in the future than you are right now. Everybody here makes that decision, right? Everybody does. And what I want, is a world where everybody's free to move up or down as much as they want to. And while I was talking about the brain surgeon before and comparing him to the guy who was doing the counter at 7-Eleven, it may sound like I'm disparaging the guy at 7-Eleven. I'm actually not. If all you want to do is sit around and get high all day, that's fine. I don't care. It's no skin off of my nose. I don't care. You want to goof off your whole life? I don't care. But I'm not going to pay for you to do that. I'm not going to pay for you to goof off. But if you want to goof off, I don't care. Let me just say one more thing about this. The difference between socialism and capitalism is actually pretty simple, I think. We can agree, stop me if I'm wrong, that when we talk about income inequality, socialists would like there to be a much smaller gap between people, and people make more or less the same amount of money, right? Is that fair? Okay, let's assume it's fair, because that's what they want. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. If you've got more than that guy does, we're going to take some of your stuff and give it to him, right? So they want an equal outcome. It's equality of result. They want equal results from across the board. They want people to make more or less the same money, have more or less the same kind of cars, the same kind of houses. They don't want people with big houses and people starving. They want the middle. That's equality of result. I believe in equality of opportunity, which is a completely different thing, and I can explain this very clearly to you. Let's imagine that this is a football field, and let's imagine that over there is the end zone, and let's imagine that every single person in this room is lined up on that end zone, and they're right on the toes on the line, and somebody hits a firing button, and the goal is to run from that end zone to this end zone with this room. My kind of equality of opportunity, says that everybody starts at the same line. Nobody gets to start from the 30-yard line. Nobody's held back at the back of the end zone. No one's got chains around their legs. People start from the same line. If you hit that firing button, those people are going to start running. All of us are going to start running. And some people are going to get there faster than others. Any athletes out here? Any track people? Oh, these are engineers. Okay. So the younger, stronger people are going to run faster, and then the older people are going to come in last. And they started out equally. And by the way, if you're a young person who's a track star and you decide you just don't want to run, you just want to walk, that's fine with me, I don't care. But if you start everybody from the same line, that's justice to me. And that's what I'm in favor of. And you say go and run the race of life, people are going to come in first, second, third, fourth, all the way down. Nobody's going to cross the finish line at the same time. That's equality of opportunity. Equality of result, which is the socialist goal, means that everybody crosses the finish line at the same time, right? Everybody crosses it. If the goal is life and the first people to get there have the most stuff and then down, 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 then equality of result means that everybody has to cross the finish line at the same time, which presents two major problems. The first problem with socialism is if everybody has to cross the finish line at the same time, equal at the end, then everybody has to move at the speed of the slowest runner in the room. Everybody. Because you cannot run faster than your fastest. And you cannot make somebody who's not fast run faster than they can. So if everybody's going to cross the line at the same time, everybody has to run at the speed of the slowest runner. Because that's the limiting factor to the equality that you're looking for, the equality of result. That's number one. Number two, in order for everybody to cross at the speed of the slowest runner, every single person has to be held back except for the slowest runner. They have to be hobbled, they have to be slowed down, they have to have weights attached to them, they have to have something to stop them from getting ahead. So not only does the race run at the race of the slowest person, it's also unfair to every single person in this room except for the slowest runner. My version of life and my version of fairness is, put everybody on the same line, hit the starting bell, and you run as fast as you want to or as slow as you want to. But that's what I call freedom. I call it the ability to determine your own life and do what you want to with your life. And that means if a guy wants to be a brain surgeon, he should make a hell of a lot more money than a guy who's a 7-Eleven clerk. That's how I see things. Yes, sir.
Okay, so on the subject of guns,
Interrupt you one second. You didn't think any of that was unfair, did you?
I see several possible problems with your metaphor.
Okay. Well, I just don't want to go out of here. I don't want to go out of here thinking like we beat anybody up. Because I think it was a great question. That's my answer to it, whatever you have to make of it. Yes, sir.
okay, so on the subject of guns, obviously there's several reasons for having guns. Personal defense, defense from dangerous animals, recreation, hunting come to mind. But recreations, you can do other things for recreation, and hunting isn't really necessary in society.
Correct.
And for personal protection, there's other options such as tasers.
Yep.
So, in light of that, and how many people die in violent gun shootings, which, while compared to like things like car accidents, is insignificant, it's still pretty big. How would you justify having gun ownership and like licensing so prevalent in America? Because we have significantly more gun deaths than other countries.
Oh, that's definitely true. First of all, the gun is not the murderer. We can all agree that if there's a room full of guns, the guns don't kill anybody. That somebody comes in and picks up the gun and uses the gun to kill somebody. And that the gun is not at fault for that. Now, you can make the case that it makes it easier to kill people. I'm going to get to that in a second. But the gun doesn't just jump up and shoot people randomly. It's a piece of steel like an automobile or like a carving knife or like a microphone or anything else. I can come over and start clubbing you with this microphone if I want to, but that's not the microphone's fault. Now, I do agree, and I'm not trying to be disingenuous here. Guns are designed to kill people. That's what they're there for. This business about hunting and stuff, I know there are hunters out there, but basically, I've got an AR-15 and I've got a .45 sidearm, okay? I have the .45 sidearm to kill bad guys at close range, and I have the AR to make sure they don't get into close range. And I'm not hypocritical about this. I have the sidearm to defend myself and my apartment, and I have the rifle to defend my block. Because I don't like seeing people get hurt. I'm not going to use that gun for aggression and crime. I'm going to use it to prevent aggression and crime. So now we get to the issue of what is a gun really? If it's an inert object, why do people have this thing about it? There's a cartoon I just loved. It was great. It's two people talking and there's a body on the ground. And in the first panel, the guy says, "You beat that person to death. What's wrong with you?" In the second panel, the guy says, "You strangled that person to death. What's wrong with you?" In the third panel, he's got a knife. He says, You stabbed that person to death. What's wrong with you?" In the fourth panel, they shot that person to death. They said, "You shot that person to death. We got to do something about guns." It's not a joke, because what that is basically doing is saying that the problem is not with the gun, the problem is in the heart of the people that commit the crime, and that's a much harder problem to solve. But let me give you the basics of why I think that guns are important. All throughout history, and any reading of history will tell you, that there have basically been two different kinds of people. There are peaceful villagers who farm and create things, and they generate wealth, and they live peacefully, and they raise their children, and the moms are happy, everybody's happy, everything's great, they live in a village, and periodically, people come riding over the hill, bands of armed men who are professional warriors, they've been training with weapons their entire lives, and they come riding over the hill, and they murder these people, and they take the stuff that they could never make, and they rape the women, and they take the children, and they take them back to be slaves. And 20 years later, this whole thing starts again. Now, if you are dealing with a guy who's a professional warrior who practices with swords for 5 hours, 10 hours a day for 25 years, and you pick up a pitchfork, your chance against him is 0. Guns are the great equalizer, because a gun means that an 80-pound woman in a parking lot has a chance to stop 3 men who are 250 pounds each. It equalizes her right to self-defense. So now the question is, do you have a right to self-defense? And there's a story I like a lot about this. Have any of you ever seen the wildlife movies of the orcas, and the orcas will drag seals right up onto the beach, and they corner the seals up against the beach, and the seals start going up the beach, and then the orca jumps up and grabs it, takes it back out? Well, I've seen those, and I'm always on the side of the seal, needless to say, always on the side of the seal. And I saw one of these, and this is exactly what happened. This seal came jumping out of the surf, this orca, this gigantic monster, comes roaring right after it, and it's got these giant teeth, and it's got its mouth open, and it goes chomp, and it missed the seal by that much, and then the seal turned around and bit that orca on the nose. Just turn around, bit him on the nose. And I remember after watching that, I said, is there anybody here who thinks that the orca doesn't have, I'm sorry, that the seal doesn't have the right to do that? Is there anybody who thinks that it's wrong for that seal to try and bite that orca on the nose after it just escaped with its life? Because I don't think anybody could make that case. I think the seal's got a right to defend itself. I think antelopes have a right to have horns, because horns help protect the antelope and the baby antelopes and the female antelopes from the lions. And if you're talking about gun control, you're talking about taking weapons away from the innocent, from the prey, and that's somehow going to reduce the predators. If I saw all of the horns off of a gazelle, that doesn't make less lions, or fewer lions. That makes more easy victims. And the easier the victims are, the more the lions are going to breed. And the more the lions breed, the more lions there are going to be. So, I want to make things hard for the criminal. And what you find, by the way, and the reason I think this is true and not just theory, if you look at the crime areas in America, murder, violent crimes, property crimes, the areas that have the most guns are the areas that have the lowest crime. And the reason is very simple. The predator, the criminal, will not go into that house because he doesn't know if he's going to come back out again. That has a deterrent effect, right? It deters people. If you don't know whether you're going to get shot going into that house, you probably won't go. So there you go. So look, I don't think the steel is the issue. I think the human heart is the issue. I have weapons, and I'm never going to use those weapons to harm people. I expect I'll never have to use those weapons at all. But if I do, I'll use them to defend me and the people I love and the people I care about who haven't done anything to anybody. And if you want to deprive me of the right to defend myself, you've deprived me of the fundamental right that I have as a person, which is to survive. Right? Guns are the equalizers. A person can pick up a gun and in 5 minutes work that gun pretty much as well as a person's been practicing with a gun. Well, certainly in my case, people come out on the range and they pick up a gun and put them right through the target, and I'm lucky if I can hit the east. If I can hit east, I'm happy. But it's true. And so it equalizes the ability to defend yourself. Now, the problem with that is there's absolutely true that we have these gun murders, and it's absolutely true that just about look, if somebody goes in and shoots up a college, there's something wrong with that guy, right? That's not something you do because you had a bad day. I've had plenty of bad days. I've never killed anybody. I've shot at a few of them, but I've missed them. So, what are we really talking about here? It is true that we have more of these shootings because guns are more available in America, and I'm not going to be disingenuous enough to say that's not true. But the problem is not the gun. The problem is you've got a guy who's mentally ill, and the main problem, the reason we're starting to see so many of these things that we never saw before, is because now, if you've got a kid who's really disturbed and suicidal, and he feels like he's nothing, and he feels like no one's ever paid attention to him, and no one's ever listened to him, now all of a sudden, this guy has a way to make it on the NBC Evening News and have his face on every single newspaper and be known all around the world. And if you're going to check on out, you might as well check on out that way. Dylan and Claybold thank you. These guys had, 15 automatic weapons in their basement? They were making bombs, and his father said, "I'm as surprised as anyone." Well, if that's true, you're the worst father who ever walked the face of the earth. If your son is down there practicing with weapons that he has no right to own, and he's got all of these bombs and stuff, and you don't know, well, now we know why the kid's a murderer, right? I mean, what kind of parent is like, well, what kind of parent is like that? These are the issues that we have to solve. And progressives don't want to talk about these issues because they're harder. They want to make the gun go away because that's an easy solution, but it won't make any difference. More people are killed by knives and bare hands than they are killed by assault rifles in this country. Far more. And the number of people that die in medical malpractice is something like 9 times the amount of people who are murdered in this country. So we're not going to ban doctors either, right? It's there. I'd like to see it lowered as much as possible. I am in favor of a background check for felons. That's my personal opinion. I know some people who say that's infringement. That seems reasonable to me. Felons can't own a gun, so we make sure that he's not a felon, then off you go. But other than that, the right to defend yourself is your primary right, and if you take that away from you, then you're stuck. By the way, all of this gun control stuff is coming from people who are such incredible hypocrites. Dianne Feinstein has got all these bills to ban guns, all these bills to ban assault rifles, and Dianne Feinstein has 3 armed security guards all the time. They're armed all the time. Why? Well, to protect me. So you're saying that you're worth protecting, but this person isn't, and she's not? You are protectable because you're a senator, obviously, and you're a very important person. So we can put guns to use to defend you, but she can't do that for herself? Really? Honestly? That's where you're coming from with this? I don't think so. No. And you find this all over the place with these people that are doing this virtue signaling. It's always about things that they don't touch. It's always about things that never affect them. So, yes, sir.
Well, when people ask, what's the need for civilians and assault rifles?
The need for civilians to own assault rifles is very simple. When you get right down to it, the main reason that people like me believe in gun ownership is because, ultimately, while we worry about crime, and that's a problem, and we don't worry about foreign invasion. No one's going to invade the United States. You know why? Because there's more guns than people here, that's why. Most of us won't even get a chance to reload if the Russians land on the beach. We don't even get a chance to reload if we just turkey shoot. But the reason we have assault rifles is very simple, and I'll just put this as plainly as I can. I think American citizens should be able to be armed to the degree that the person who's coming after him should be armed as well. And if the government's coming at you with AR-15s, you should be able to own an AR-15. And that's what I believe. And if the government starts coming into people's houses with tanks, then you should be able to own an anti-tank weapon. Because people say that could never happen here. You say this to progressives, they go, you're nuts, you're just insane, that could never happen here. I agree, but it could only never happen here because it's so difficult. And this was one of the first things that first thought I ever had about anything that wasn't about airplanes. I was probably 6 or 7 years old. I just want to set up the story because it's a great story, and I don't want to take too much time, but it's just awesome. When I was a little boy, my dad fought in World War II. He got to Germany in the last week of the war. He got there in April of 1945. He was never shot at, nothing. But he fought the Germans. He thought he was going to get killed over there. So when I was a boy, I was drawing pictures of airplanes, and I would draw the stars on the wings of the American airplanes and the machine gun bullets coming out, and then on the wings of the German planes that were going down in flames, I drew the swastika. But if you're a little kid, a swastika is actually kind of hard to draw. It's a little tough to get it exactly right, so I practiced on my hand. And I drew all the swastikas on my hand. Right. Well, my dad came home and saw that. It's the only time I've ever seen him lose his mind. You know, my mom had to like get there and say, he doesn't know what he's doing. I fought my entire life to defend us against the symbol. You know, this is he had a right to be kind of torqued about that. But when I asked my dad many years after that, I saw a picture, and you can find it. And for every picture that you see, there's 100,000 that were never taken. And you'll see a giant pit like a quarry, and you'll see a line of people naked, 200 of them. And their heads are bowed, and they're naked. And inside the pit are dead people, and they're moving up to stand in front of the edge of the pit so they can't be shot in the back of the head and fall on top of the other dead people. I saw this picture at 8 or 9 years old, and I said, Dad, why don't they make a run for it? What have you got to lose? You can see you're about to be executed up there, for God's sakes. I mean, what have you got to lose? There's 2 guys with bolt-action rifles. For God's sakes, why don't they just take these guys, grab the rifles, and make a run for it? And he said, Bill, that's an American way of thinking about things, but the rest of the world doesn't think that way because they never had a chance to think that way. People went to their deaths because the idea of resisting was simply not in their vocabulary. They just didn't believe it could happen, and so they didn't believe it happened, and then it happened. But the reason I told all this story is very simple. Very simple. My dad said something that I never forgot. I said to him, okay, so you're saying that if the SS were to come to our house, you could defend us against the SS? He says, no, I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying that not all of them are going to go home that day. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying if the SS comes to our house to take us out, the SS is going to lose some guys. Right? Now you're at the root of the problem. Because if it turned out that you've got, 40,000, 50,000 SS guys rounding up 6 million Jews, and every one of those 6 million Jews takes out one SS guy with a gun, there is no more SS anymore. That only works against an unarmed population. And when you talk about socialism, and socialism sounds wonderful, but when you talk about socialism, you have to talk about the fact that that race I was talking about, in order to make everybody cross the finish line at the same time, you have to hold back everybody except for the slowest runner. That has to be done by force, by coercive force. And it's covered with the fig leaf, well, we're taking from you because you have taken more than your fair share, we're giving to the poor. But it's still the force. And so, this is the essence of what I'm trying to say here. This is one of those things that's invisible as well. It's a force field that prevents the government from even thinking about taking over Americans' individual liberties because they know that they're terrifically outgunned. And it's more than that. Most of it is the quality of the men and women in the military and people like these law enforcement personnel over here too. I have not the slightest doubt, I don't mean to bring you guys into this, but I have not the slightest doubt whatsoever. Well, these men are ready to risk their lives for your safety. I have not the slightest doubt in the world that if anyone told them to do something immoral or wrong, they would simply refuse to do it. They would just not do it, because they're good men. And that's what you need in the world. You need good men. Some women can do it, but basically, this feminist idea that we've got to get rid of manhood so that we don't have any violence is exactly wrong. Bad men are coming over the hill, and they always have, and the only thing that's going to stop bad men is good men. If you take men away, you're going to be butchered. Right? You're going to be butchered. Now, all of this is hard, right? It's easy to talk about banning the gun, but what are we talking about here? This idea of manhood that my father instilled in me is a difficult thing to do. It's very hard. You, on one hand, you have to be willing to be violent, you have to be willing to be ready to shoot somebody, and at the same time, you have to be wired in such a way that you could never ever do that unless you absolutely had to depend on it. And this ability to become this kind of person, this kind of sheepdog, is what makes civilization stand. I'll just tell you about the sheepdog real quick, and then we'll move on. I'm probably out of time, I guess. I'll go until we're done. There was a guy who wrote a military guy in the Army. That's where most military guys are, in the Army. Or the Navy, or the Air Force, or the Marines, or the Coast Guard. But this guy wrote a pamphlet. There was a short book called The Bulletproof Mind. And basically he made this analogy, which I think is one of the best analogies I ever heard. He said you could look at this Western society of ours and you could put people into 3 different camps. The huge majority of people are sheep, and he immediately leapt in here. I mean, he didn't let one sentence go by. He says, by sheep, I do not mean stupid, gullible, followers. I don't mean anything negative that's associated with sheep. I'm not talking about mindless herds. I'm not talking about that at all. When I say that they're sheep, all I mean is that they would never harm another person. They're morally and ethically and emotionally incapable of ever hurting anybody. Virtually everybody in this room, I'm not so sure about you, but virtually everybody else in this room would never hurt somebody, wouldn't go around murdering, raping people. You just can't do it. It's not in you. So, what he's basically saying is the huge majority of the population is sheep to the degree that they're peaceful, cooperative, decent, loving, kind people, right? Now, outside, around this giant group of sheep is a small number of different animals, and these animals are called wolves. And wolves don't have a conscience. I can't watch any animals being suffering or torturing, but a wolf will take a brand new baby lamb and rip it to pieces alive and eat it while its heart is still beating, because a wolf doesn't have a conscience. It's wired to do that. It can't say, oh, I feel sorry for the lamb, maybe I'll take this old guy, this old sheep looks like he's been around, maybe it's time for him. No, they want the easy victim, the young, the old, the sick. So those wolves are always there, and they're predators. And I think that human society is the same way. Most people are very kind and very sweet, and out on the perimeter are criminals and murderers and rapists who are predators. And so why do we talk about a sheepdog? Well, the thing that's interesting about a sheepdog is a sheepdog looks like a wolf. It has teeth like a wolf. It's got claws like a wolf. But it's not a wolf. It protects the sheep. These 2 men over here are sheepdogs. What I mean by that is they're not sheep to the degree that they are armed and they're ready to commit lethal violence on somebody, but they are not going to use it against the herd. They're going to use it to protect the herd. They are, in some ways, when I said that a sheepdog looks like the wolves, in some ways they look like the predators. They've got guns, they look like tough guys who wouldn't want to mess with either one of these guys. So they look kind of like the wolves, but they're not wolves because their heart is different. They're dedicated to saving the herd. They're sheepdogs. And we need more sheepdogs in this society. We need them right now. And that's an individual decision for everybody to step up to. And do you want to go longer? Or I take questions all night. I really don't care. Want to do one more? We do one more? Yes, sir.
I have a question going back to, I guess, government regulation of commerce. It's something I've struggled with. A lot of conservatives like to argue that businesses should have the right to do business with whoever they choose. If they want, they should be able to discriminate against homosexuals, etc., and that the free market will control for that. However, with the Civil Rights Act and discrimination against blacks in the last century, I find it hard to consider that without the government stepping in and coercing businesses into not discriminating that way, we would have been able to, fix things that quickly. And so I wonder why should we apply different logic to allowing businesses to discriminate against other groups?
I've heard that question before, but I've never heard it anything like that well phrased, because the way you phrase it presents a much greater ethical dilemma. Yes, you're right. The Civil Rights Act of 1965 which was really the big deal, was actually, I know you're going to think I'm nuts, but it was actually proposed during the Eisenhower administration in 1958, and it was actually blocked by two key Democratic senators. One of them was named Senator Kennedy, and the other was named Senator Lyndon Baines Johnson. But why didn't it happen in 1958? It didn't happen in 1958 because the country wasn't ready in 1958, but by 1965 it was. You make a very compelling case for why the government should do that. A very compelling case. I think that, however, if it's a private business, you should be able to do with your business what you want to do with your business, or else it's not your business. We don't have any problem with saying no shoes, no shirt, no service, right? It's discriminating against the shoeless people in the world, right? We don't have any problem saying that. We don't have any problem with saying that a loud drunk is not allowed in my store because he's spitting on people. We don't have any problem with keeping that guy out either. So what we're really saying is this. Do you have a right to run your business the way you want to, or does the government have a right to make you do things you want to do? Now, everybody looks at the gay rights issue because, appropriately enough, oppression of gays is something that is almost like the last frontier in American society. The acceptance of gays is really the last big, honest-to-God social revolution in this country in terms of acceptance, and that fight's over, by the way. And the gays won it, and I'm very happy it turned out that way. It's over. But we always look at this as, when we say a guy's going to discriminate against somebody, we always make it a case that is repulsive to us, because it should be. I'm not going to serve you because you're black. That's reprehensible. But is it reprehensible for somebody who's a progressive to say, I'm not going to serve you because you're a conservative? What if the person who owned that bakery, what if it was owned by two old Jewish couple, old Jewish man, old Jewish woman, and they had tattoos on their arms from their time at Auschwitz? And let's say that the customers were Nazis, American Nazis.
Well, that...
Would those two people, should they have to be forced to bake a swastika-shaped cake and provide it to those American Nazis, or do they have the right to say no?
These examples are discriminating based on opinion, though, which is something that people can control. And I think a large number of people would argue that homosexuality is something that's part of people's identity and isn't just an opinion that they're expressing.
Completely agree. But let's go back to the example of the old Jewish couple who survived the concentration camps, right? Because we always look at the ethics the way the left wants us to look at it, but the ethical issue is exactly the same, so let's look at it from a different point of view. I'm not in favor of discriminating against gays, needless to say. I'm totally in favor of them having... It doesn't matter what I think, it's the law, and it's the way it should be. But let's go to that example. If you had two old people who suffered in the concentration camps and had tattoos on their arms because of the Nazis, and a couple of American Nazis come into that bakery and say, we want you to provide a cake and we want you to cater our thing as well, do those people not have a right to say no? I don't want to live in a world where somebody is going to make somebody do something that's that reprehensible to their core beliefs. I just don't want to live there. I don't want to live in a world where somebody's going to make old concentration camp survivors make a swastika-sized shaped cake and deliver it. I don't want to live in that world. Now, unfortunately, there's only one logical position with this. It's like abortion. It's either on or it's off. You're either pregnant or you're not. Either this law exists or it doesn't. And in order to protect those people, you have to be consistent. And consistency would say, yes, any person who owns a business technically should have the right to discriminate against whoever they want to. It's their business. Now, society has changed enough so we can afford this kind of thing, because if somebody put up a sign in a restaurant in downtown San Luis Obispo and said, no blacks allowed, under my system, he would be allowed to do that. But what would be the result of that? People would be protesting outside that building. That's their right too. And nobody would go to that building and no one would go to that restaurant. And that's their right too. And so what happens is you're not taking away that business owner's rights, but you're still achieving the same social goal that we want, which is we want freedom, we want equality, and we want access. But you're doing it without coercion. You make a very good case about whether or not that would have happened in the 60s, but the reason I mentioned the Civil Rights thing was the Civil Rights Act was ready to happen. And it would have happened without the law. It would have taken a little longer, but it would have happened. So I have to be consistent. All of these positions of mine have to make sense. And if I believe in freedom and private property, then yes, you should be able to say, I don't like you and you're not allowed in here because you're gay, or you're not allowed in here because you're black, or you're not allowed in here because you're a famous conservative on the internet and I don't like you, and I don't like any of your beliefs and I don't like any of your kind. I am a member of Code Pink and we don't serve conservatives here. I'll go someplace else. I would say we put a big protest out there, but we don't protest, we just go home and make money. So that's the problem with being a conservative. Anyway, I think that's probably going to do it for the night. Thank you so much for coming out. And it's